Davis 4-3 in the win. Oh, it's good!
Crosby in on goal, backhander, he scores!
And good! 49ers win it!
Welcome everybody to the 11th episode of the Loki Sports Show, and today I look at a bunch of different kind of smaller topics I want to discuss today, because on the last episode we already kind of talked about the playoffs, kind of the games that already happened, the wildcard weekend, divisional round preview, all that kind of stuff. Right now, and since the inception of that video, we've had a bunch of kind of coaching changes. A lot of coaches kind of let go. I'll be kind of talking about some of the more noticeable ones for the NFL. Then, of course, after that, I'll be talking a little bit about the NBA, have some things I want to talk about. So, without further ado, let's get into it. With the first topic I want to talk about would be, for the NFL kind of side, we have Joe Lombardi, the former offensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Chargers, has been let go, but he basically got fired from the team, and that happened a couple of days ago. So the main thing kind of with the Joe Lombardi kind of firing would just be that the main takeaway from, obviously, other than the fact that his offense was really kind of inconsistent, and also it did not play to Justin Herbert's strength, it kind of tells me that the Spanos family is unfortunately really all in on Staley, even if Staley was still a big part of, obviously Joe Lombardi has a big part of that as well, but in tandem they were both a big part of why they blew that 27-point lead against the Jaguars on Saturday. But my main kind of takeaway would just be that they're just going to find a new offensive coordinator, and they're going to stick to their guns, because the Spanos family probably doesn't want to pay the rest of Brandon Staley's, I forgot how much it is, like $4 million a year kind of contract, but they don't want to pay the rest of that contract just on the basis of they're cheap. That's one part of it, and also part of the reason why, if you see if you ever see a coach and you're wondering how come that guy doesn't get fired or why is he still there, this happens especially with the Raiders are an example of this with Josh McDaniels. This has happened with a couple other coaches as well. The main thing with coaching in the NFL that makes it different is, well, for any sport, but especially the NFL, is that whenever a team pays a coach's salary, it's not exactly part of the salary cap. That's basically out of the owner's basically front pockets, because the salary cap and all that stuff is based on the amount of revenue they made, because a part of that has to go back to their team, so they usually have to pay the players most of the time, of course. Obviously, if they spend a little bit more, it's because they have more money to spare than some other owners. But basically, when it comes to having coaches on the books for NFL teams, that's completely on the owner's dime. So let's just say they fired Brandon Staley, and let's check out how much he makes a year. Brandon Staley, yearly salary. Okay. So basically, he has a 4-year, $4 million contract, which means that he basically gets $1 million a year. So the way that this kind of goes down would just be that for every so if they do fire Staley, let's just say whatever contract they had to whatever money they had to pay, which should probably be, because he would be done with his second year, they had to pay $2 million out of their own pocket right now, or as obviously as whatever the contract says, and that's not part of like the salary cap. I don't think they can really kind of restructure that or anything like that. So basically, that's a bunch of money that be left in the ground that they're not really using anymore, because obviously he would not be part of the coaching staff. Then, of course, they need a new head coach. And so basically, if they sign another head coach to another kind of 4-year, $4 million contract, make it simple on ourselves, they'd basically have to be paying whatever was left on Staley's contract, and of course, whatever the new coach would be making, which is probably why they don't want to exactly, won't see Brandon Staley fired, even if obviously he's a big part of why the Chargers underperformed and all that stuff. Because obviously the on the field product is one thing, but then I know the Spanos family, especially Dean Spanos, are very kind of penny pinching owners, if you will. I know there's a lot of bad reports about them. There's drama there. There's a lot of kind of uncertainty with that. So that's probably why you won't ever see Brandon Staley fired unless he has another season, or they'll probably just decide to fire him. Or what's probably going to happen, though, judging on how the Chargers have worked before, is that they'll let him just play out the rest of his contract and not have to pay any extra money to any while basically paying for 2 coaches at the same time. But so that's like the first kind of topic for the NFL, and then kind of moving on from one coach to another, ended up becoming more like a Brandon Staley kind of deal rather than like a Joe Lombardi. But Joe Lombardi's kind of got scapegoated in all reality, so that's why I ended up talking more about Brandon Staley and why, if you think, well, they fired the offensive coordinator, where they're not firing just everybody, it's because it saves them money if they don't fire them and just let them go once their contracts are up. But anyways, kind of moving on from that, we have what seems to be the whole Tampa Bay offensive staff. A lot of it got let go on. This was yesterday, and I was also on yesterday's videos. I kind of briefly talked about it, but I want to kind of go more in depth today. So it's basically, let me kind of read out this tweet. Buccaneers make changes to coaching staff. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers announced that today the team parted ways with offensive coordinator Byron Leftwich, specialist coach Chris Boniel, wide receivers coach Kevin Garver, offensive quality control coach Jeff Castle, assistant defensive line coach Lori Locust, and running backs coach Todd McNair. In addition, quarterbacks coach Clyde Christensen, senior offensive assistant Rick Crostafel, and outside linebackers coach Bob Sanders have decided to retire. And then that's just basically thanking them, but it's his PR talk. So what does this kind of mean? Basically, what this means that they got rid of nearly they gutted almost entirety of their offensive staff, other than maybe a couple positional groups. I don't really see the majority of their staff, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Even some guys on the defense have been fired. So we have a couple things we want to take away from this. Is this just the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? They had like 3 really good years. They won a Super Bowl. They made the playoffs all 3 years with Tom Brady. Is this them saying, well, we had our chances? Obviously, they signed players. They're really aggressive in free agency. I remember they brought in a lot of guys like Dominic Sue, Antonio Brown, stuff like that. Or are they just basically just saying, are they saying that, okay, we're just gonna hit a rebuild now? Hopefully, just get young talent, maybe draft a quarterback, trade up. I'm not really sure how that's gonna go, because I know they have Kyle Trask and Blaine Gabbert, but it's probably not the best options at quarterback, if I'm not mistaken at all. So other than that, we can say, obviously, they're just going to get rid of all these guys. Maybe assign some newer, younger coaches. I'm not really sure. Or alternatively, Tom Brady, they want to bring him back, of course, because it doesn't seem like he's retiring. Even he probably doesn't know if he's retiring yet. So on the off chance he does, he is a free agent, so he can sign anywhere. This is probably just to appease him, because we all know that a big part of the Buccaneers' downfall this year was their offensive staff, just because a lot of people who did watch a lot of Buccaneers games know that Byron Leftwich had really bad play calling. Just, it was really consistent. It was just a lot of very basic concepts, nothing really special, nothing that used Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Russell Gage, nothing that really was able to kind of take advantage of what Brady likes to do, especially handing the ball off. I know the running game was really bad, but after a certain point, their offensive line was hurt, but it has to do partly of coaching as well. Then, of course, we also have no play action, which I know Brady loved to do in New England. A lot of different things just like that led to their offense being really stale. And there was a reason why Brady threw the ball like 50 times just on the Tampa Bay game alone. Like, that's crazy that he's 45 years old. He has to throw the ball that many times, and he still doesn't win. Just because, obviously, they were down a lot, which is part of the reason why they threw it. But they really just can't get anything going on the ground game. And that has been the thing for the whole year. Against bad teams, good teams, whatever they played, they could not get the running game going at all, and that's what led to everyone just kind of selling out to stop their passing game, which was really consistent. But after a certain point, it's just like, is there something not right with the play calling? Just because it seems that whatever Brady wanted, they were just never on the same page with his wide receivers. Obviously, part of it could just be said, well, he's older now, and that's always just because he's 45 now, he's 44, late 40s, mid 40s now. So basically, we can just say that and it's call it a day, just because after a certain point, we do expect any player to play who's playing end of the NFL in such a high level to just fall off due to age. That's natural. That's what happens. And Brady kind of avoided for a really long time, and we can say that, well, this was just part of it. But there's a lot of the things that would be kind of called Brady never seemed comfortable with, or he just missed off the timing. So I understand why they probably fired Byron Leftwich. So then if he does come back to play in the NFL for another year, he would most likely want to go back to Tampa Bay. Maybe he'd be able to call the plays a lot more. Maybe he'd have more of an offensive coordinator who did what he wanted to do instead. Kind of like what we saw in Pittsburgh, where Randy Fichtner was really Big Ben's kind of buddy instead of kind of a separate party as well. That could possibly happen, but I really don't know if Brady will come back to the NFL at all. And I really don't know, secondly, if he'll come back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So obviously a lot of kind of coaching changes throughout the league. I know Black Monday was kind of slow, honestly. Only 3 coaches and 3 coordinators, like I think maybe 5 at the most, kind of got fired. I know Lovie Smith obviously got fired before. Some guys got fired like on Tuesday. But Black Monday was kind of a little anticlimactic because I know there's a lot of jobs that were kind of rumored, especially like Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, that are kind of rumored to be going out pretty soon. So now this week, it seems like a lot of those jobs were kind of held, especially in playoff games, and now we have a lot more kind of action going on with that. But so that's what I kind of have to say about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm not sure what this means. There's a couple ways to interpret it. I would think that they're probably heading towards a rebuild, because I'm not sure if they want to commit. Obviously, they would love to commit to Brady for another year, but I'm not sure if Brady wants to come back, especially with how the last season ended and of how like it seemed that a lot of the players there were always injured. He might just want to go to a new team, try to see if he can bring championship or whatnot. But anyways, the next kind of coach I want to talk about would be Ed Donatell of the Minnesota Vikings, and this one was, for Vikings fans, a very well received one, just because a lot of Vikings fans I talked to a lot of them plenty, especially on Twitter, Discord. By the way, follow me on Twitter if you haven't already. Easiest way you can reach me. But a lot of them have been telling me that, well, Ed Donatell has been really bad. He sucks. His schemes do not make the most out of his players, and obviously I don't really watch too much Minnesota Vikings football. I don't really pay attention to that too much. Obviously, the only guys I've been really paying attention to would be Justin Jefferson. He's been having a crazy season, but their defense and kind of some of the rest of their players, I'm not really as invested. So I want to go check out, see what their point was. Why do they want an Ed Donatell really gone that badly? Just because normally when people want a coach this badly gone, it's always because they're doing something wrong. And when I checked it out, nothing really kind of surprised me, because the Minnesota Vikings are at the bottom of, they're the second worst team when it comes to total yardage given up their season. Yards per game, they're second bottom of 388.7 yards given up per game. Passing yards, same thing, 265 passing yards given up per game, which is easily second highest. Rushing yards, they're a little bit better. They're kind of middle of the pack. And their scoring defense is bottom 3 in the league. So that alone says that their defense is really not good. And then they have pieces such as they have Zadarius Smith, Patrick Peterson played pretty good this season, and they have a couple other pretty nice players. Some of them are a little bit more inconsistent, but obviously those players are long. Like those are some of the top names. But I know I'm missing one of their other defensive line pieces who's also really good as well. But kind of the main point of me kind of saying this would just be Ed Donatell did not make the most out of his talent he has on defense, too, if you want to leave it that way. And his numbers were really bad. And the thing is, it's kind of crazy how the Minnesota Vikings defense was really bad, and no one kind of talked about it until obviously Ed Donatell was let go, just because remember when the Detroit Lions had a horrible, their first 6 games or so, they had a horrible start, and they still had a really bad total kind of defense, but no one kind of ever talked about after that. Of course, everyone talked about that, but for the Vikings at least, no one really talked about just how bad their defense was, because I didn't know that it was this levels of kind of bad. And it's just crazy to see, just because obviously they won 13 games, even if they had a negative point differential, so that would have been doing something right. If you kind of want to look at it that way, they went 13-4. You would think that the defense would have at least held up their end, because the other teams that won that much games, like the San Francisco, obviously, Kansas City, Buffalo, Cincinnati, also I'm missing out on Philly as well. even Dallas, like those teams all have top 10 level defenses. The Chiefs are a little bit more. Let me check out their defense really fast. It's a little bit more towards like top 12, top 13 kind of level of defense, but still, obviously, they're in the top levels of defense, like at least top 15. At least they're in the top half of the league. The Vikings were there was a really awkward team this year. It's on all levels of offense, defense, how close a lot of their games were. So that's one thing you'd want to consider with that. So that's one thing I want to mention about how Donatell got fired, and a lot of Vikings fans are happy because that their defense did cost them the game against the New York Giants. Because let's be real, Daniel Jones, it's kind of hard to gauge him because this year obviously is a lot better, but against the Vikings, he looked. A lot of people are kind of making like there's like the meme on the internet right now. People are calling him the vanilla Michael Vick. People are saying he's Danny Dimes. He's like all these kind of like funny nicknames. But when you watch the game, like it generally looked like sometimes he looked like Steve Young out there. Like he was running I feel like especially in the first half, Daniel Jones would just run anywhere he wanted to go. He'd pick up like at least 12 yards of carry. That's just obviously in the second half their defense kind of was able to hone in on it a little bit more, but the first part of the game, that was obviously Saquon Barkley feasted as well, but the first part of the game, Daniel Jones was running all over them. He had just so many open lanes to just whatever he wanted to do, whatever kind of hole he saw, he'd just be able to take it and just run with it. He'd get 12 yards and he'd go untouched out of bounds. So it's not like he was getting punished for those yards he'd pick up. He'd run, he'd be able to kind of get past one defender, go out of bounds safely, come back for the next play. And they gave up 31 points to that Giants offense, which is not as bad as it was last year. Because last year was like a bottom 3 offense, but still, like guys like Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slayton, of course. They have Ballinger, who was their tight end. Like a lot of these guys are either really young or Isaiah Hodgins' case, he played a really good game. Gotta give him credit, but he was a practice squad guy for the Bills like a couple months ago. So these are not like guys who are like I'm just going to throw it to like Philly. It's not like an AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Quez Watkins. Like those are like really talented receivers compared to what the New York Giants have. And one thing to get torched by the Philly team, which they did earlier in the season, way on by the way. But it's another thing entirely to get beat by guys like, as I mentioned before, Ballinger or like Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slayton, Richie James, guys like that. Like a lot of those guys were kind of cast offs or just signed off practice squad waiver stuff like that. And it's just crazy how they give up 31 points to that team, which shows it shows how bad Ed Donatell was, how bad the Vikings defense was, and then B, it shows how well prepared the Giants offense is, because obviously there's two sides of it. You can always say how one team played bad. You have to also say how another team played good as well, especially in something like this when happens. How well Brian Dable prepared his guys, his scheming, all that kind of fun stuff. And what really makes that a little bit more funny is just that Ed Donatell was like on a press conference, he was saying, oh, well, I think people are going to like what the Minnesota Vikings defense will have to bring. And then after the game was like, the only person who liked the defense is probably the Giants, because as I mentioned before, Daniel Jones was just going absolutely bonkers on that Vikings defense. Let me give out total yards just so I can kind of, against the Vikings, let's check this out. Against the Vikings, he had, and off of 24 completions, 35 attempts, 301 yards. Passing yards, of course, 8.6 yards of an attempt. He had 2 touchdowns. His longest was 47. And then let's check out his rushing stats. That's what I really want to talk about. This was kind of skewed because in the second half, he wasn't as effective, but in that first half, he had 17 rushes, or for full game, 17 rushes for 78 yards off 4.6 yards of carry. So obviously pretty efficient running, especially for a quarterback. Especially one that people didn't really know that he was that mobile until the Vikings game, which kind of shows how Ed Donatell unfortunately played to his opponent's strengths rather than his own team's strengths. And so yeah, that's what I'm kind of saying about Ed Donatell's. Obviously that one playoff game was able to get him fired, but it wasn't really just that. It was a full kind of season of obviously bad defense, just giving up yards after yards, keeping opponents in close games. And then it just kind of shows that well, the other thing I want to talk about with how he got fired was that the day before he got fired, they had obviously like a post kind of I was obviously their postseason because it was done, but it was like kind of the end of the season recap, like their press conference. Normally every team does that, and their coach Kevin O'Connell was all saying that, well, I don't think I'll make any changes anytime soon. Like he was just kind of being all super. He was obviously dodging the question, and he said that he wouldn't make any big changes the next day he got fired. So obviously he didn't want to face the music and tell everybody that he was getting fired. So, but obviously if you kind of read that body language, you can kind of tell like something was gonna happen just because he didn't really look. He was kind of obviously kind of trying to hide something. So that's one thing. That's another coach who got fired. Like the last three, understandably so, a big part of why their team lost in the playoffs. But and then we have one more coach I want to talk about who got fired from the NFL, of course, which would be Greg Roman. He was the offensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens for a couple years, and this one's kind of a little bit harder to gauge, honestly, just on the basis that Greg Roman has some like really impressive stats, but I feel his stats come at the cost of a lot of the times, as we've seen before. They never made it to the AFC Championship game when he was offensive coordinator. Obviously, none of these teams. Obviously, Tampa Bay still won a Super Bowl when Byron Leftwich was offensive coordinator. He wasn't a play caller back then because it was Bruce Arians, but was still on staff. And a couple of these guys, other teams are still a little bit newer to getting in the playoffs, or they had to make the playoffs in a while. But the Ravens, they're a consistent kind of playoff team, or they're always close. 2019, 2020, they made it. Last year, there just had a bunch of injuries. This year, they made it. And they never got past the divisional round. And it's crazy just because you see like all the Ravens have like they have so many rushing yards per game. They have like almost like I'm pretty sure they're almost like at the 200 mark per game. They're always running the ball with Lamar Jackson, with so many different guys because they're always like right now it would be J.K. Dobbins. It would also be Gus the Bus Edwards. No, they also had Kenyon Drake as well. They have a lot of guys whoever they have back there, they're always running the ball really well. Their tight Mark Andrews always plays with the Ravens pretty good as well. Tight ends really play good in that kind of system. But as we kind of talked about a couple episodes ago, and why Greg Roman, he's a really good running game coordinator. I'm not gonna take that away from him. He's a really good running game kind of coach, just because he's always able to get yardage, just no matter how injured his guys are. He's always able to make any running back fit in that system. Offensive line guys, tight ends, of course. But the main reason why he was always able to kind of always get regular season wins, but not ever really help his team kind of reach the postseason. Obviously, part of it's because obviously there was some gas on Harbaugh's part, especially when it comes to time management, especially this last playoff game against the Bengals. But as I mentioned before, the main thing with the Greg Roman offense is just that it's great for running, it's great for getting a lot of yards per carry, getting the most efficiency out of like Lamar, Tyler Huntley, whoever they have, whatever mobile quarterback they have starting, whatever running backs they have. Great for tight ends too because they get a lot of targets. But the main kind of crux of that would just be their wide receivers seem like they never get any real kind of action. It never seems, well, Lamar Jackson's a very talented pocket passer. And even guys, a lot of people who actually watch the games know that. But unfortunately, though, media narratives, people who are casuals, they kind of spread the narrative that Lamar is a running back, a quarterback. But the thing is, when you look at a lot of his guys who, like, when he has, like, guys, and his best guys are like DeMarcus Robinson, Isaiah Proche, or like, and then a couple years back, he had Hollywood Brown, but that was really it. Like, they're signing guys like Deshaun Jackson, and Deshaun Jackson been in the league for like well over 12 years. So it's one of those deals where it's just, they never can sign off offensive talent, not just offensive talent, but specifically wide receivers. And that's why they struggled, especially when at this last game, at the end of the game, they had to start passing, they had to start going to the end zone, and if they probably had a couple extra pass catchers or like really good wide receivers, they're like probably like a true wide receiver one, they would probably be able to at least be able to get a lot closer than they were in that last drive against the Bengals. And a lot of wide receivers have been kind of asked about that, like how come no one ever wants to go play with Lamar Jackson? Obviously, the easy answer says is that, well, Lamar Jackson's not a real QB, he's a running back, whatever. But the main thing is it's going to have to be, they're not going to, wide receivers, obviously, they make their money off catches and targets and all that stuff. And when you play in like a system like the Greg Roman offense, they're not going to be targeted as much as if they go to like a team like the Chiefs or like kind of like a Bills kind of squad, even like an Eagles team, where those teams who are top of their conferences, they're just airing it out, throwing it, especially deep, especially if the Bills and the not so much the Chiefs anymore, but especially the Bills and the Eagles. A lot of their play calling is kind of like those intermediate to longer routes, especially with Josh Allen's arm, and that's how they have in Philly. And the Chiefs did it obviously back then with Hill, but obviously Hill has moved on, so they have to do a little bit more of a kind of a more short to intermediary kind of targeting system. But I'm getting kind of carried away with that right now. But anyways, a lot of wide receivers, why would they want to go to a system that lets running backs and tight ends do the majority of the work, and they're kind of just at the end of the day, they're not really doing too much in the Baltimore system. And even if they get a play for a guy like Lamar Jackson, they're probably not going to get the calls they want or get the targets they're looking for, which is why you haven't seen a star wide receiver go to Baltimore in a really long time. So that's part of the reason why Greg Roman got let go, was because they want to have a little bit more of a balanced kind of attack. But the main thing would be what's happening with Lamar. Everyone wants to know what's happening with Lamar, so I'll kind of talk about that for a quick minute as well. When it comes to Lamar Jackson, John Harbaugh said that he's 200% sure he's coming back, and I don't believe that honestly at all. Just because obviously John Harbaugh saying one thing, he has to say one thing, so he can obviously look good for the PR, and then the GM doesn't lose leverage on a trade or anything like that. But when it I forget which sports betting app it was or website. I believe it was either DraftKings or like Pro Sportsbook. One of those sportsbook kind of websites had the Jets as like a kind of like a clear favorite to get Lamar. So either the betting companies know something we don't, which they probably do if we're being real, because they've had some crazy betting odds just randomly go up, and it seems to always kind of go their way. I feel that's never a coincidence. And or John Harbaugh or whatever they have is obviously could be wrong, which I'm not really sure it can be either one of those things. Who really knows what's going on with kind of like the Lamar Jackson thing. So I'm not sure if he's coming back, and if he does come back, it would make sense that they would let go of Greg Roman, so they can have someone who, I'm not sure who they would bring in for the new offensive coordinator, but they would have someone who could be a little bit more balanced with running, passing, more vertical concepts, all that kind of stuff, rather than a lot more of just the run it almost nearly every play, go for it on every down because you'll just run on third down anyway, kind of style that Greg Roman was a lot more accustomed to. That's something he would do. And who knows if Lamar Jackson had input on that, if he told the Ravens that he wouldn't come back if Roman's back. Who knows if they're just doing that to hopefully get him to sign back, and they kind of know that they'll have to franchise tag him and trade him because he didn't want to play. Who knows about that? There are so many different things we don't know with the Lamar stuff, especially with what's his. I feel before his value would have been insanely high going into this year if he was able to stay healthy, but unfortunately he had that MCL sprain, and that probably devalued his stock a lot. Probably now I don't think there's a team that's as willing to. I'm pretty sure there's some teams who would be a lot more who are still willing to, of course, have him for like sign him to like a 5-6 year kind of contract. But before, I feel if he didn't get injured this year, though, what happened the year before was more like a one-time deal, he would have freaking gotten so much money and a really long contract. But because he's been injured kind of back-to-back years now, I think that kind of aren't. I don't think teams are as willing to, but of course, some teams are a little bit more desperate, such as the Jets. Obviously, as I mentioned before, they're kind of the favorite on some of the betting websites, and they've been stuck in a quarterback carousel. They've been trying to develop the young guys. Nothing's really been able to pop up for them, so they probably hope that if they have Lamar Jackson, that can turn their ship around. I'm not sure if that will be the case. Obviously, I also heard some guys like New England is interested as well. That's another team I heard that would have interest in Lamar Jackson. I'm pretty sure Bill Belichick would love to have a mobile quarterback, especially because And people kind of forgot about this, but Cam Newton was on the Patriots for a year in 2020. That didn't really work out just because Cam Newton was really hurt that year. He was coming off of shoulder surgery. He wasn't healthy that year. There was COVID. There was a lot of stuff that kind of happened with Cam Newton, which is why he didn't play to what probably Bill Belichick and what everyone thought he would play to. And then that's why he got cut in the next year in favor of Mac Jones. But anyways, so that's probably why the Ravens have been making some of the decisions they have made, especially when it comes to firing Greg Roman, and which probably means I don't think they're rebuilding, because obviously if they want to rebuild, they would have traded a lot more pieces by now, or we'd have a little bit more of an idea what they'd be wanting to do. They'd probably get rid of Jim Harbaugh too, but I mean not Jim, John. Sorry, I got the brothers confused. So I don't think they're rebuilding, but they're going to try to get Lamar Jackson to be in their favor, so they don't have to trade him, because no one really would want to trade a guy like Lamar, but if he doesn't want to be there, and he'll probably, and we've seen guys already like Deshaun Watson hold out already for a bigger contract, more guaranteed money, and all that fun stuff. For the back half of the this episode, I'm gonna be talking about the NBA. So the first thing I want to talk about, kind of regarding the NBA, would just be how tightly compacted the Western Conference is. So let's check this out. Obviously, I can kind of go over the East first. The East is a lot more top heavy. It usually always is a lot more top heavy, like the Celtics, 76ers. Right now, some of these like second or like fourth ranked teams in the East, Bucks, 76ers, Celtics, a little bit of on a skid right now. The Bucks were on a big skid earlier. The Sixers have kind of been able to rebound, and because I know they were missing James Harden for a bit. Nets kind of on a losing streak because I know they have no KD, but right now they're generally always pretty compact. The top is, then everyone else, like their 10th seed is 12.5 games back, while in the West the 10th seed is 10 games back, so a little bit of a difference there. Right now, obviously in the West, some teams are it's kind of weird, just a bit. Is because in the NBA, especially how some teams play a lot more games in 1 week than another team will. It has to be on win percentage, but for at least the play-in, or if you want the play-in spot, especially in the West, the way it works, at least for the NBA, top 6 seeds don't have to play the play-in, 7s through 10 play the play-in tournament. And so basically, if you just want to make the play-in, like the bare minimum, really, if you are like right now, the Trailblazers are, while they might be 11 games behind the Nuggets for a first seed, the way you can kind of see this as if there might be the 12th seed, which normally gets you nothing in almost every other year. However, because the play-in tournament, they're basically just 1 or 2 games back. It was based on winning percentage behind the Thunder. Same thing with the Suns. They're already 1 game back. And so if you just won the play-in tournament, which is basically of the participation trophy of the NBA, which is basically, it's a guarantee you at least get like a semi-postseason kind of game. It's really crazy how close that is. And then obviously the only team that's really kind of starting to fall back is of course the team like me and my family go for, the Lakers. They are still 2 games back, which is not even that bad, especially if how they're 5 games below 500, which is kind of crazy, especially because they're the worst non-tanking team in the West. The only team that's completely out of like a play-in / playoff picture in the West is literally the Spurs and the Rockets. And if you are a little bit more casual at the NBA, or if you're just not in the know, it's very obvious that the Spurs and the Rockets are just tanking this season. Tanking, which means basically they're just trying to get a higher draft pick because this year there's a if you don't really pay too much attention to the NBA with how the prospects are coming out, there's a guy from France named Victor Wembanyama. He's like well over 7 foot, can shoot, can run a fast break, can handle the ball, plays insane defense. It's basically like a 2K. It's basically like a 2K creative player kind of guy. Stu Henderson, very talented person right now. He basketball player. He's playing with the G League Ignite. He's probably the 2nd overall pick. Right now, there's a little bit more development, especially on kind of like 3, 4, and the rest of the picks in the draft. But those 2 picks alone would change the franchise probably forever with how talented they are. So that's why if you see teams out, if you ever pay attention, you see, if you're ever paying attention to basketball, wondering, hey, why are the Spurs, Rockets, Pistons, like, why are they just kind of like so awful? Like, what's the point of not like the playing tournament is almost so easy to make. Why are they not at least trying to get in there? The main reason why they're trying to tank, especially because a team like kind of like the Pistons, like the also the Spurs, Rockets, they're probably not going to sign too many prime free agents. So tanking is the best way to get young talent in the NBA, whether people want to admit that or not. That's just how it is. Tanking in the NBA is way more prevalent than basketball. So if you're mainly here for basketball content, you kind of listen to this segment. The tanking in the NFL does happen. We've seen it, but even like the Texans or the Bears, their tanking is just not on the same level. Teams like the Rockets have done, Hornets, Magic, like, and the NBA, it's just crazy how much players just get shut down, or they say they have an injury and they don't play, and then just so they can get a higher draft pick. And this was mainly kind of spearheaded by the Sixers a while back, but kind of getting off topic. Just I'm just saying that to demonstrate a couple teams are still not in the mix for the spot in the Western Conference, but at least for the top spot, for like the top kind of teams in the West, they're really only like the Grizzlies are only like half a game back of the Nuggets, and for Pelicans, Kings, with the Kings are also in the playoff tick, so you know that it's a kind of a weird season because they've improved a lot and they're playing really good basketball. These guys are only like 6.5 games, which in the NBA, which means if like the Nuggets go on a skid, like a 3-game, 4-game kind of skid, which happens, and the Kings get on fire, win a couple games, they can get the number 1 seed. It's just it's a very streaky kind of league, especially with the NBA. So that's one thing that would, if that happens, would really kind of determine a lot of different things. And this actually segues really good, which with kind of streakiness, on my next topic for the NBA, which would be this trade deadline is going to be really weird. And there's like a 2-part way of explaining this. First part, we have obviously, when it comes to any trade deadline in any sport, we have teams that are buying and teams that are selling. Teams that are selling, which means, hey, they're probably not going to be able to win anything in the playoffs. They might just want to get a better draft pick. Or they're just kind of so bad that they're going to trade away maybe a young guy who developed way faster than they thought they would, doesn't maybe fit their timeline, to a team that can use them, so they get more assets, and then develop those guys on a more of a linear timeline. And of course, the teams who want to win a championship, want to make a playoff push, and they need. And if they're kind of maybe one step behind or so, if they just want to kind of solidify their spot, they can easily, of course, just pick up one of the guys that the sellers want to get rid of. And in the NBA, it's a lot more complicated than what we probably initially thought, because I'm going to take the Jazz as the main example. The Utah Jazz were expected to be one of like the bottom 5 teams in the entire league coming into this year. But the thing is, right now they're 24-24. They're just 500, but people did not expect them to have like 20 wins this season. So they've already kind of outperformed what people thought they would do. And that kind of leaves the Jazz in a really weird state where going to the season, I'm pretty sure even, I am blanking on the GM's name. He used to be part of the Celtics, but even he probably thought that at the trade deadline, I'm just going to sell because the team's going to be a little bit more desperate. I'll just get rid of guys like Mike Conley, who probably some teams who need a veteran point guard would want. Mike Conley, Jordan Clarkson scoring off the bench. He'd be a great 6-man. Right now, I'm not really sure if he started. I'm not really sure what's going on with their lineups. I know there's been some injuries. Larry Markkinen has been crazy. I'm not sure if they'd want to keep him and just have him for when they were able to make a playoff push, or they just want to get rid of him and then flip him to another team that can use him right now. So just stuff like that. Those are just some of their players right now. That obviously there's a lot more. I'm just kind of naming those just because it's the easiest. So the main point would just be, going into the deadline, I'm pretty sure that now that Danny Ainge, however, has seen that, well, my roster is obviously a lot more win now than they initially thought, because they're in the 6th seed right now, assuming everything stays the same. Obviously it won't, but as a 6th seed, that means no playing tournament, so you don't have to get upset by a lower seed or have to win just to make it. You're good to go. So you can say, well, right now, instead of just wants to get ticket sales, if that's kind of the main prerogative, what he can do is he can just trade for a piece instead of selling a guy like Mike Conley. Right now, it's kind of a lot of teams are not really putting out who they have on their trade market, but basically, instead of selling guys, now he can be buying, and then that can help him for a little bit more of a playoff push, maybe get past the first round or so. Who really knows with that? And that's just kind of the whole thing with the NBA right now. And that's why even Shams Charania, who is one of the best newsbreakers for the NBA, has kind of said right now it could be a really boring trade deadline for the NBA, just because a lot of teams don't know if are they selling right now, are they going to be buying, are they going to be trying to get rid of players, are they going to be trying to trade for players, like, especially in the West. After only a couple games behind the playing game, and for current roster, you think, well, if you go on a little bit of a run, kind of get hot, maybe at the right time, maybe they don't get hot, maybe another other team kind of drops a little bit, then you're getting the last spot in, and you don't have to really you don't have to risk future draft capital on many kind of young guys that you might have. And that's just kind of makes the NBA a little bit weirder now, just because the NBA is obviously a players league. That's what it is, a lot more than any other sports league in North American sports. And that also kind of complicates things, just because a lot of them guys they trade for, whether it be rentals or whatnot, can kind of for a trade later. And that's happened especially for a star level player. Well, at times they'll sign a contract and then they'll ask for a trade the following year, and then they usually get their way because the players have a lot more leverage in these situations, which is why who really knows with how teams kind of want to approach the trade deadline this year. A lot of teams don't want to risk future draft capital, especially with how valuable this draft is supposed to be, with how valuable some picks are going to be, especially in the future. Who really knows? Because now it's kind of weird. A lot of teams have another team's draft pick as their own, so it's kind of complicated. But if they have like a team who's underperforming, they don't want to give up that draft picks, and know it can be really good down the line. So the main thing would also just be kind of going back to the bars and sellers. Like a team like the Raptors, they're well below 500. They're 6 games below 500. And do the trade pass? I highly doubt, but of course, they can always trade like the Pascal Siakam, Scotty Barnes, whoever. And then a lot of their players are just really slumping. It's kind of weird in Toronto right now, but like a team like that can say, well, obviously they thought that would be kind of in the thick of it for the playoff kind of race. And then they can just easily just be able to say, well, we'll be able to trade our guys, and then obviously get draft picks and compensation back from later. And then they can get another younger core down the line, probably a great draft pick. Who really knows with that? And that's the thing. I think teams have just gone a lot smarter with giving up picks, especially with how, like the Lakers, for example, they give a bunch of picks for Anthony Davis. And then right now, if they do, because they're in the bottom of the West, they're one of the bottom teams. If they do have those odds, and then that pick goes to New Orleans, they can trade, and then because they gave up so much draft capital, then that pick they gave up goes to New Orleans, and they can draft whoever they want. So that's one thing you really want. A lot of teams are considering is that obviously they want to get a win now guy, but if they just kind of bank on, they hope that their roster can just kind of go on a run, is because they don't want to trade for a guy. He leaves in a couple of years, like 1 year, because at the end of the day, a lot of players, especially if they get traded to like a small market team, they're really just rentals. They'll want to get off as soon as they can, and then get any draft compensation back. So that's why they're a lot more careful. They don't want to give up like 4 picks or so for like one player who's like going to be there for 2 years. Then he immediately leaves. So it's basically 2 years for one player, rather than you could have used that pick, maybe develop someone who could have been a lot more loyal, and then they could always pay them, because of how the NBA works is that only the team that drafts you can offer like the max amount of money in a contract. So that's another thing you'd want to consider. So like I'm just going down the list right now. Like a team that everyone thought would be a lot better off would be like, as I mentioned before, the Raptors. They're not in the playing picture right now in the East, and they're only a couple games behind, but still, as I mentioned, that's another reason why, as I mentioned before, teams are not probably willing to do trades, is because they're only like 1 or 2 games behind playing spots. So they think if they go on the run, they can get it. But realistically, what can be best for them long term is this: they sell some pieces now, get draft capital, younger guys, develop them, and they'll be fine in the long run. But some teams obviously are much more interested in just trying to get ticket sales. Like a Washington Wizards team is a team that should be absolutely selling. They've been stuck in this whole mediocrity cycle for years now. Like a guy like Kyle Kuzma, a lot of people want him. They want like a kind of like a wing that can be able to defend his ass off. But right now they're not really willing to sell or kind of hear any trade demands, which I don't know why. They can probably be able to get a lot of compensation back for a player like that. Maybe trade a couple other ones as well. Who really knows with that roster? Who really knows what they're kind of planning? Because the worst spot to be in the NBA, which is why a lot of teams are really just kind of being careful, is that the worst fear would be they trade for someone or they don't trade or not do anything, and then they're kind of in what would now be kind of like in the bottom, not like complete like 15, 14 seeds, but not also like maybe like an 11, 12 seed where they don't even make a play in, but they also still don't have the best draft odds, so they don't really get the best of either kind of sides of winning games in the postseason or getting the best draft pick. So that's kind of what to say about why the NBA trade deadline is kind of slow. A lot of teams are being really cautious. They don't want to exactly get rid of a player who develops onto a star in another team, I think. Or, of course, they don't want to trade for a player who just leaves on the first chance they can get to another destination, which happens a lot in the NBA. And that's kind of crazy because normally, like this year in the NFL, if you paid attention to the NFL trade deadline, there was like 10 transactions in like 2 hours. It was a fire sale. Everyone was moving pieces left and right. A lot of, like, even a player like Calvin Ridley, who was suspended, still got traded. And then guys, obviously, before like a CMC deal kind of broke down as well. And normally, it's the NBA that has like a lot of crazy stuff because, and then so one thing the NBA has is that whenever a player gets an extension, they're not trade eligible. If they're not drafted by that team, they're not trade eligible for like a couple months after their extension or for a full year, depending on how if they're drafted by the player or not. So right now that I believe that that kind of clause is gone, a lot of those players who got like a DeAndre Ayton, who got a contract extension but probably doesn't want to be in Phoenix right now, he's eligible to be traded. So who knows if that. So now that kind of window's open, but as I mentioned before, the trade deadline is like in a couple weeks. Like it's supposed to be early February, and no like big rumors, no nothing. A lot of teams don't want to get rid of guys or overcompensate for a piece that might not even help them too much in the long run. There's a lot more kind of cautiousness for this, which is correct. Normally, the NBA is a gung-ho league. Normally, a lot of GMs right now are just throwing away picks. They're getting rid of young guys. We're really trying to get those rosters going, get new talent in right now, so then they have enough time to gel with the rest of the team before the playoffs start. But so I've been kind of alluding to a lot of people don't want to give up big draft compensation anymore, and people don't want to give up a lot of exactly young players. They don't want to kind of give that up. So the main example of why this has kind of happened and why a lot of teams are not really certain on whether they want to buy or sell, especially if how the rosters are constructed, is because of Rudy Gobert trade. So basically, the Rudy Gobert trade was an absolute blockbuster deal because the Timberwolves received Rudy Gobert, and then the Jazz received Malik Beasley, Patrick Beverley, Leandro Bolmaro, Walker Kessler, Jared Vanderbilt, 4 first-round picks, and a pick swap. So let me kind of break that down for you. Basically, the Timberwolves received 1 player, and they gave up like 5 players of depth and 4 first-round picks and a pick swap. So if they're worse than the Jazz can just swap it. They have the rights to, obviously. And this one trade alone probably caused the market to reset, because one thing that also didn't kind of mention was this, that a lot of teams now want crazy asking prices, specifically for their superstars. They don't want to give them up. Before it was just kind of like a couple first round picks, but now it's turning, because of Rudy Gobert trade, deals are not being held up because Rudy Gobert is a really polarizing player. His value is not as kind of concrete as someone like the Kevin Durant thing that happened over the summer. Kevin Durant, if a team wanted to trade for him, it was like 6 first round picks allegedly, and like a star and like a couple and a young guy, like something like that. And the reason why they think that's compensation is because, well, they're gonna say Rudy Gobert got 5 young guys, 4 first rounders, and a pick swap, and that's just one player. So that's one thing you want. And obviously, KD is a much better player than Rudy Gobert. He brings way more scoring than Rudy Gobert does. So that's why, if you want this guy like that, you'd have to give up whatever they give for Rudy Gobert plus a couple extras and more star talent, which is why this one trade probably ruined basketball trading for at least the next couple years. Because if you look at a guy, let's check this out. Let's check out who would probably be trade eligible / people, someone like if you trade up for a guy like Pascal Siakam, right? Pascal Siakam's a very underrated player. He is averaging 25 points per game. He's off of 47.5 field goal percentage, 8 rebounds, 6 assists. All right, he's a really good player, and people kind of forget about him because he plays in Toronto. No one really talks too much about Toronto's, especially in the media. So a guy like that obviously can bring real value to, especially a team that's kind of on the edge of a championship push or whatnot. So if the Raptors did want to say, well, we're going to trade Pascal Siakam, but you have to give us like 5 first-round picks and like kind of like a young star kind of player and like a role player. Before that would have never happened. No one would have ever given up 5 first-round picks for Pascal Siakam. But because Rudy Gobert got traded for 4 first-round picks and 5 other guys, who basically one of them was basically a first-round pick. So if you kind of want to consider that 5 first-round picks, and you consider the pick swap, 6 of Minnesota picks for 1 player, and Rudy Gobert is one of those players where he's a very great defender, especially at the rim. He'll average kind of like 14, 15, 16, like in that kind of lower like the mid-lower kind of tiers of scoring per game. So that's why it's kind of weird also going back to the NBA trade kind of front. A lot of teams right now who are going to be trading guys are asking for prices like that, because if the Jazz were able to get that much for Rudy Gobert, their logic is we can get more, obviously, because Rudy Gobert, everyone kind of knows that in the postseason he has his faults, that sometimes he can offensively kind of be very quiet and shut down. So that's why they're thinking, well, if Rudy Gobert gets that much, if they do trade like a Devin Booker or some of those other teams who are kind of on the edge of those teams who are not really sure what they're doing, they're obviously going to ask for way more than would have before. So that's one thing you want to really kind of take attention. Especially if you're an NBA fan, you're wondering, why is there no crazy deals? Why are teams not being more aggressive? Why, like, just especially if you're like a Mavs fan, Lakers fan, also probably maybe even like a Pelicans fan, Blazers fan, you're probably wondering right now, how come Luka, Dame, LeBron, how come our GMs are not getting us help? What's going on? Obviously, you have every right to be upset, especially if your team's underperforming and you see a guy like Luka absolutely just go crazy every game and have like no help around him. But going back to what happened to Rudy Gobert trade, the help you would have gone before for with those players, like another star or another like, couple really good role players, now those deals are absolutely out the window because you have to give up so much. Now a lot of GMs are probably not even wanting to trade with anybody because they know that every GM is basically out to fleece them. Especially what happened with the Minnesota Timberwolves. They basically gave up 1 player for, if you want to consider it, 6 first-round picks on technicality and 4 role players. So if they're able to get that compensation for Rudy Gobert, other teams would probably think they can get even more compensation for their star player. And fair or not, that's just kind of how the NBA is kind of going towards this year. So that's why if you're ever wondering if the NBA deadline, why there's nothing going on, why it's really quiet, that's basically what's happening. So that's kind of all I have for you guys today. So I want to talk about a little bit more about coaches, their roles, and why teams underperformed, trade deadline, stuff like that. A little bit more niche stuff, but still things I think were a little bit more interesting. So thank you guys for listening to the very end, and I will talk to you guys later.